Okay, I've moved outside because there's a bit of work going on next door and there's a bit of a drill from time to time. So hopefully it'd be a little more quiet out here. Now, for this section on sovereignty, which focuses on the Civil War in the United States, uh, I want to start by letting you know of a fantastic book, particularly if you're in the United States. It is called Fruit from or of a Poisonous Tree. I think it's by Melvin Stamper. A lot of good information in this book, particularly as concerns the United States. I've said before, and I'll say it again, the most sublime civilization document ever produced was the Constitution for the United States of America, and it has been badly damaged. There is something called the Santa Clara Railway case that you should probably know about, and I'll try to link that below if I can remember. Check out Melvin Stamper's book, Fruit from a Poisonous Tree. There's a lot of great stuff in there. One of the things that he talks about is how the a provision for a allodial title was created. Now, a allodial title is what actually makes you the complete and total sovereign. You own the land, you own the land. And that's been lost, and he details how a lot of it's been lost in court cases and commercial law and all this kind of stuff. I notice people on Gab are talking about, banning income taxes or property taxes, stuff like that. Actually, what needs to happen is getting back those allodial titles and finding out where they went and how they got destroyed and getting them back, because that's really what the fighting and the dying was all about. Now, according to Eustace Mullins, Abraham Lincoln was the first black president of the United States because I think it was his maternal grandmother or his paternal grandmother, one of them was black. And of course, the Southern Democrats and the National Democrats had created the Jim Crow law, which meant one drop rule. And if you had one drop of black blood, you were black. And if you look at Lincoln, he had some peculiar facial figures or characteristics. Now, there's a guy named Miles Mathis. I mentioned him before. He's done an interesting little bit about Abraham Lincoln and how his death was faked and staged. And, it's an interesting question. You got to read it, really, to sort of get your head wrapped around it. I'd recommend you look it up on the Miles Mathis site. I'll try and link it below if I can remember to do that one. I've seen some things on the internet about, Abraham Lincoln thought he was Jewish. And I don't know whether there's truth in that. I've seen the allegation that, of course, he was a Jesuit. Now, the Jesuits were started by the Jews in order to penetrate the Catholic Church, much the same way the Freemasons were started in order to get a handle on the budding British Empire, which is how they ran a lot of it. And by the way, if you haven't seen that movie, National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, just going back to the British intrigues in the Civil War for a second, there's that great scene where this character Nicolas Cage plays is looking for this desk that was given to Albert Pike by Queen Victoria, and there's this little symbol burnt into it. And of course, Albert Pike was not only a general in the Southern Confederate Army, but he was the Grand Master Mason of the Southern accepted Scottish Rite Freemasons. So total inside dude, total made man. And this is how the British Empire worked then, and I'm pretty sure that's how it works now. And yours truly considers globalism to be nothing more than the British Empire repackaged, with the United States doing the military, naval, rule Britannia gig, making sure that they're looking after all the gates of shipping and trade so that the oligarchs can control the resources, which they used to get from around the world, and then they would put them back in England where they would manufacture them, and then they would dump them out under tariff, getting filthy rich in the process. Well, now they dump it all in China. They do the manufacturing mostly in China and in other places. Pennies on the dollar. You, like Trump said, have watched your factories line the landscape like tombstones. So this is what these clever bastards have been up to. But I'm also going to try and link a document below about the 14th Amendment, because it was in the 14th Amendment, and you've seen maybe some allusions to this in the Spielberg movie about Lincoln, where there's that scene and Lincoln's talking around the table with these guys, how he took the slaves and he freed them. But my understanding is that what happened is he took those slaves as property. So if you've seen the Clint Eastwood movie Unforgiven, at the very beginning there's this scene in the whorehouse, and the whore gets all cut up, and then they call the sheriff, and he comes over, and the guy who runs the place says they're property, and he says, oh, property, eh? So you're in property law. And so this is, where we need the knowledgeable people in the legal field to start sorting out what's actually going on here, because the way I understand it is that Lincoln took the slaves as property, and the slave owners were never compensated for the loss of their property, like someone taking your tools or, your tractor. They took the property, and he made them property of the federal authority, the United States, right, by 14th Amendment citizenship. So if you have no longer your sovereign status in your state, like a sovereign of Maine, and you've become a 14th Amendment citizen, you've made yourself, as far as I can tell, property of the federal authority, which is not how your Constitution was designed. You were supposed to be a 100% sovereign of your state, controlling all the rights and having access to the rights of that great Constitution. The Bill of Rights, allodial title, the works, Article 3, Common Law Courts. So I think that's where the game's gone. And I would encourage you to look into that, because there's got to be a way to go back to becoming a state sovereign, which is, as far as I can tell, in this whole question of, is Alberta going to become the 51st state? Well, what's the point of becoming a 14th Amendment citizen? If you're going to become the 51st state, you want to be a state sovereign. Sorry, I got a message coming through here. So, yeah, look, check that stuff out, because that's what I think happened. And there were some other things that went on at the Civil War period which started to change the nature of the United States from being a republic, a union of sovereign states, functioning more like a nation, but in a way that hasn't really been made clear, perhaps, to the American people, who now don't know their Constitution as well as they should. So I think we'll leave that there, and we'll call that a cap on the sovereignty conversation for now. Thanks for watching. If you are well advised of these matters, I like to study this stuff as best I can. I'm not a trained lawyer, but I always appreciate good feedback and good commentary in the chat below. So take care.